the federal codes, he drew up an executive decree which allowed the Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau, to exempt whoever he wanted so that they could trade with the enemy. So these Illuminati families like the Rockefellers, who controlled Standard Oil, and Onassis, were given the freedom to trade with the Germans so that they could keep the Germans supplied with essentials like diamonds there's a lot of industrial uses for diamonds, including they were needed for the gyroscopes and the gyroscopes for the V-2 rockets and everything. They supplied Germany with oil, designs for military equipment, and a lot of other things that, had the Illuminati not been given that special privilege of continuing to trade with Germany during the war would have come to an end easily by 1942.
So basically we had an embargo on Germany if we wanted to, but we just never closed the embargo. Or we just never kept the supplies from coming into the country.
Well, if you were one of these Illuminati bloodlines, one of these powerful men, kingpins is the word I use, within these Illuminati bloodlines, you had the privileged status of being above the war.
Above the war.
The rest of us, it was a real war.
And actually, Fritz, I think I can remember from your book, as from the Onassis chapter, his fleet of ships almost went unscathed. Is that correct?
Totally unscathed. They were never attacked.
How many ships did he have?
It was between 200 and 300 ships, merchant ships.
And he's from the Greek fleet, correct?
Yeah,
Greek merchant ships.
His ships flew the Greek flag. Essentially every other Greek ship that was floating when the war started was sunk. But his ships went in all of the theaters of the war, the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and they were never attacked by either side. It took collaboration at the highest levels for him to travel around in a world war without anybody bothering him, while he made millions, perhaps billions of dollars off of the whole thing.
This is incredibly fascinating. I tell you what, Fritz, we're almost running out of time here, but before we do, I would like you to briefly touch on, I know you mentioned it earlier, how the Bush family has been coming into prominence here of late. Could you give us maybe a little bit more of a background behind that family?
Some of our listeners out there may be familiar with the Order of the Skull and Bones, which is a chapter of the Illuminati, and that they have rituals with satanic undertones. One of the things that they do is lay in a pile of manure when they're being initiated and say all of their sexual exploits. Yeah, I know. Satan causes his minions to do degrading things that they think, for some reason, because their minds get warped, that this is something great. The Bush family is related, it's one of those families that's related back to British royalty. Mm-hmm. And Bush was head of the CIA. And I think it's significant to point out, if our listeners haven't caught it already, they may have already noticed this themselves, but you had the head of the KGB. You know, the KGB has been running Russia and the USSR, and over here we had the head of the CIA, George Bush, who becomes president, and now his son is running. It should make people realize that at least that the intelligence agencies have co-opted these countries, but it's deeper than that, because the intelligence agencies are being used as a front for these powerful families. And there's literature out there that talks about how the intelligence agencies have been prostituted to these powerful these powerful families. In fact, KGB intelligence, a large share of their intelligence, is simply being used to spy on Western industry and companies so that they can take all these trade secrets back for Russian capitalists, or Russian gangsters, I should say.
Wow, truly incredible. Also, Fritz, I remember this also from your talks over the weekend. I don't want people to think that you're like the only person out there talking about it, and not just today, but I mean throughout history. I remember you mentioned how Senator McCarthy, most people think out there that McCarthy was just afraid of communists, but it's really, from your research, Fritz, do you really think that was the case?
No, it wasn't the case. I mean, I was like everybody else. I only knew what I'd been told until I started reading speeches and talks and things that he had written, and I was blown away. I realized the man knew exactly that there were these powerful families, that there was a world order, and he was going after these powerful families. That's why he went after the Bundys, and of course the Illuminati kingpins in our government thwarted an investigation into Bundy. Yeah, he really understood, and so because he was after these powerful people, these movers and shakers, they have used him as a verbal punching bag. I mean, I've watched, I don't know how many people denegate his name, even, you know, in the last few years. I mean, you think the guy has been dead for a long time, they'd forget him, but Bill Clinton has used them as a punching bag, and then George Bush. So
it's the Illuminati almost use him as an example. Like, if you come after us, this is what's going to happen to you. Isn't that correct?
Yes, yes.
That's totally horrible. Well, I know we've just got a few minutes left now, for sure. But before we go, I wanted to ask you, Fritz, how can we, as normal, everyday people, recognize perhaps the policies or the agendas which are pushed on us through the Illuminati front organizations?
Oh boy, that's a good question, but it's also a big question. Well, you will see that there are certain things that are politically correct, and you will also notice that the world is going towards central control.
Right.
It's going towards globalization, where we're having the United Nations. You know, the United Nations was formed out of the League of Nations, and there's a continual push to have one political, one world government.
Now, isn't that just a natural evolution of perhaps human society? I mean, as the world seems to be getting smaller and smaller through technology, most people would say that would just be a natural evolution of our whole government system.
Well, it's definitely being pushed, and whether one wants to believe that's a natural outgrowth of improved communication and transportation, that's up to the individual, but it is definitely being pushed. It's taking a lot of money and a lot of effort to make it happen, and the push behind it are these global elite families that are controlling things from behind the scenes. So not only do we have political globalization, but we have economic globalization, and we have religious globalization. So when you see any kind of an agenda that contributes to this one world order, or as Bush has called it, New World Order, or, you know, Hitler, who was also of these bloodlines, also referred to New World Order. That seems to be a popular term with them.
Right, and I noticed earlier, when you had mentioned it, you just said World Order, that you didn't put the new in there. Why is that?
Because it's not new at all. In fact, they keep using the same formulas. The things that controlled people back in ancient Rome, you know, where they had bread and circus, they're using the same formulas that they used in antiquity on us today. And bread and circus simply means that if you give the common person entertainment and plenty of food, like the junk food we get, they'll be happy. And most people, as long as they have their beer and their football game, are happy.
Unfortunately, that is true. Well, I tell you what, Fritz, I really appreciate you coming down here, taking time out of your busy schedule to come give us an interview, and I look forward to having more talks with you in the future.
Thank you. It's great.